Hey, North Harbor. Time for our midweek devotional from the book of Acts, and we're going to look at the second half of Acts chapter 9, starting in verse 32. So earlier in Acts chapter 9, on last Sunday, we talked about the conversion of Saul. Very dramatic, big, important, world-changing things happening there. And then the camera sort of flashes back to Peter and his activities, and we see him engaged in two different miracles. He heals a paralytic, and then he raises a woman from the dead. Someone who's died and very much loved by her community dies. A woman named Tabitha or Dorcas, depending on which language you're speaking. And he raises her from the dead. Very dramatic. And then in Acts chapter 10, what we're going to talk about this Sunday is Peter's meeting with Cornelius and the visions that they have and the dreams that they dream. So a lot of dramatic things going on in the book of Acts, which are really incredible stories, just very rich. But there's a trap I think we can fall into if we look at all these incredible things happening and then we look at our contemporary church experience. I think sometimes we can feel that contemporary church can just pale in comparison to what's going on in the early church. And it's important for us to know that, people being blinded on the road and being converted and regaining their sight and people being raised from the dead and paralytics being healed. These incredible things, all point towards the power of God and specifically the power of Jesus, certainly. But the author of Acts is not trying to, there's no idea, there's no thought that comes across that this is supposed to be normative for everyone's experience. But I believe that, when we're just looking at stories written on a page, and we're flipping through all these incredible stories, we just feel like, maybe my faith doesn't measure up. And what's really important about these, and you see this in this little section that we're going to, look at in the second part of Acts chapter 9, is that when you look at the bones, when you look at the basics of this story, it's very simple faith stuff. It's just being faithful in very mundane and simple ways. And I think that if we miss that, we're going to miss the true power of the story. That even in simple ways, God is working through his people. So for example, before Peter heals the paralytic in Acts chapter 9, verse 32, it says, Peter traveled from place to place to visit the believers. And in his travels, he came to the Lord's people in a town which is northwest of Jerusalem. And so, first of all, right there, we see that, Peter's just simply traveling around, visiting people, just encouraging people, just checking in to see what's going on, what are the reports of church, and how are they doing? It's a very simple just checking in. And I think that if we miss that, we're missing something so important in the book of Acts, is that the Spirit of God and the power of God, even the very powerful things that are changing people's lives, the structure, the bones behind it is Peter simply visiting and going to see people. Later on, he goes to Jaffa, a city that's still there in Israel today, Jaffa, and he comes across these people who have this woman in their community, Tabitha, who has passed away. And I love it because before he raises her from the dead, in verse 40, it says, Peter asked them to leave the room. So he's alone in this room with this person who's passed away. And he knelt and he prayed. We don't see any power that Peter seems to have of this incredible, here's what a Christian looks like. No, he's praying. And so in these little things that happen, particularly in prayer, we see that the direction, the focus is pointed towards someone beyond Peter, and that person is Jesus. So what we're reading here with these incredible miracles and these stories is the power of Jesus, that Jesus' power is working through his people. But when we look to see what his people are doing, Peter's traveling around. He's kneeling to pray, right? That's what we need to do. That's what we need to be reminded of, the simple power of prayer. And he tells her to get up. And in both of these cases, with the paralytic and with Tabitha, and the miracles associated with them, we read at the end, the news raced through the whole town, and many believed in the Lord. It wasn't many believed in Peter. It wasn't that people came flocking to Peter. It's that many people believed in Jesus. And so even with all this powerful stuff, which I think we may be tempted to look at, our lives, the life of our church, and say, wow, it just doesn't seem to measure up here. Underneath it all is, number one, it's a pointing people towards Jesus. It's the power of Jesus. It's the traveling around to visit, simple things like prayer and just visiting with people, just being with people in the power of the Spirit is where this power comes from and where the world is changed. And this woman named Tabitha is raised from the dead. And everyone is so excited, not only to see a miracle, but listen to how she's described here. Talk about simple and talking about beneath, the surface and the bones and the simple things underneath the actions. Listen to this description of her. There was a believer in Jaffa named Tabitha, which in Greek is Dorcas. She was always doing kind things for others and helping the poor. And she became ill and died. She was always doing kind things for others and helping the poor. I love that is what stands behind this power, this person who was so powerful in that community, that helped so many people that needed help, that she did good things. She helped people. And that Jesus sees that, sends Peter along. Peter hears word. He goes. And Peter doesn't do it on his own power. He prays. He just simply goes to God and he prays. And this woman who helps so many people is raised from the dead. And her ministry, which is so simple and something that we could all do and all be a part of, just simply doing good things for other people, she is resurrected and she comes back to life and she's able to continue that ministry. And it sits in the background of these fantastic stories. This simple but extremely powerful faith. And even Peter, who's doing these incredible things, it's prayer. It's visiting people. It's being there. It's listening to what's going on and being willing to walk across the street, go across town, go to the other end of the country and serve in very simple ways. So be encouraged, because this is a powerful book. And if we're not careful, we're going to miss these little nuggets that show us that faith, even in the simplest form, is incredibly powerful and can change our world. All right. Hope you're all doing well. We'll see you on Sunday. Bye.